I'll never forget the look on their faces when they saw my old Chevy hook onto their shiny BMW. The streetlights had just come on, glowing amber against the weekend dusk, and the neighbors began to gather phones out, pretending to check their messages but secretly recording. My daughter's face went pale first, her hand trembling as she pointed at me. Her husband, with that smug grin I used to ignore, stepped forward like he was going to stop me. But he didn't, because deep down, he knew this wasn't just a tow. This was the moment everything he'd built, every lie, every fake smile, every dollar he stole was being pulled away in front of everyone. I didn't shout, didn't gloat, didn't even smile. I just said the same words he once said to me when I begged him to slow down his arrogance. Business is business, son. The crowd went quiet. The BMW rolled forward on the hook, its perfect tires spinning uselessly. I didn't look back. I just drove off, feeling the years of humiliation, silence, and betrayal finally lifting like exhaust into the cool evening air. But to tell you how I got there, I need to go back, before the betrayal, before the lies, before I learned that sometimes the people you raise are the ones who look down on you the hardest. I used to think peace was something you earned. Work hard enough, save long enough, love deep enough, and maybe, just maybe, life would let you rest. That's what I believed when I closed my garage for the last time. I'd been a mechanic for 40 years. The kind of man who could tell the make of a car by the sound it made 3 blocks away. My hands had permanent stains of grease and oil that no amount of soap could wash off. The town kids used to call me Rusty, half joke, half respect. My old shop sat at the corner of Mill Road and Birch Lane, right beside the diner that never changed its menu or its coffee brand. The kind of place where people still waved from their cars and gossiped about who bought what. I liked it that way, simple, predictable, until my daughter met him. He was everything I wasn't: polished, charming, fast-talking, the kind of man who could sell you your own toolbox and make you thank him for the deal. He came into her life through some business seminar she attended in the city. She came home glowing, saying how he was motivated, visionary, entrepreneurial. I tried to like him, God knows I did, because I wanted her to be happy. And for a while, I thought maybe she was. They married quick, moved into a new house, and started talking about launching an automotive startup together. He called it Modern Motion Automotive Solutions. Fancy name for a man who couldn't change a tire without YouTube. Still, he had something I didn't: charisma. He could turn a 5-minute conversation into a 5-figure investment. And when he asked for my help to get the business running, I said yes. I gave him everything I had left. My old contacts, my garage lease, my reputation, even the old Chevy that had been with me longer than most friends. I thought I was helping build their future. Turns out I was handing over the keys to my own downfall. You don't notice betrayal right away. It doesn't come like a storm. It drips. First he stopped calling me sir, then he stopped listening. Then one day I walked into the new shop, my name still faintly visible under the fresh coat of paint, and he introduced me to a group of investors as our retired advisor. Retired. As if I was some relic from a forgotten era. I laughed it off in the moment. But inside something cracked. It got worse from there. The phone calls grew shorter, the visits fewer. Then came the excuses. We're restructuring. We're targeting a new market. We'll settle your share next quarter. My daughter, God bless her, tried to play peacemaker. Dad, he's just under pressure. Give him time. But pressure doesn't change a man, it reveals him. And what it revealed was ugly. I found out the truth in the simplest, cruelest way possible, through a bill. One morning, the bank called about an overdue payment. I thought it was a mistake. My name was supposed to be off everything, but it wasn't. My name was still tied to the lease, the insurance, and even a supplier account he'd opened in my business credit line. He'd used my legacy as collateral and never told me. That night, I drove by their shop. The new sign glowed in white and blue. Modern Motion Automotive Solutions. The parking lot was full of imported cars, the kind of scene that screams success. And right there in front, under the streetlight, was my old Chevy tow truck now bearing his company logo. I stood there for a long time, just watching it. That truck had been my lifeline during the hardest years. I'd pulled families out of ditches at midnight, hauled wrecks from the highway, and used it to tow more dreams than I could count. Seeing it there, with his name across the door, felt like someone had carved my story out of existence. When I confronted him, he smiled like I was an old man complaining about dust. "Look, you're sentimental." "I get it," he said. "But this is how business works now. Branding, reinvestment, expansion." He used those words like armor. But all I heard was, "I used you. You're done." My daughter stood beside him, silent, her hands folded like she was praying this wouldn't get worse. I wanted to yell, to break something, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, "You'll understand one day when someone does the same to you." He laughed. That laugh still echoes in my chest sometimes. After that, the calls stopped completely. I was erased. They built their empire, bought a fancy new house, and started driving around in a silver BMW like royalty. Meanwhile, I went back to quiet mornings with black coffee, old tools, and a radio that only caught 2 stations. But peace doesn't erase pain. It sharpens it. Every time I passed that truck, my stomach twisted. Not because of the money I'd lived through harder times, but because of the disrespect. Because they'd built everything on my back, using my name and my sweat, and now acted like I was the old fool who should be grateful. Just to be ignored. You can take a man's money. You can even take his pride for a while, but you can't take his memory. And I remembered everything. Then came the day everything changed. It started small, like all big things do. I was having lunch at Marty's Diner when an old friend from the tow registry came in. He told me the company my son-in-law ran had applied for a new service license using an unregistered truck still under my VIN. My old truck. Legally, it still belonged to me. He didn't even bother changing the registration. That was his arrogance, thinking I'd never notice, never care, never have the fight left in me to do something about it. That day, I went home, pulled the old paperwork from my filing cabinet, and felt something in my chest settle. It wasn't anger anymore. It was purpose. Cold, calm, clear, for the first time in years. I slept through the night. In the days that followed, I started making quiet visits to the DMV, to the local licensing office, to an old friend who still ran the towing association. No one thought much of it. After all, I was just an old mechanic running errands. But every signature, every form, every update was a small piece of a larger plan, one that would take months to come together. And as I worked, something strange happened. The bitterness faded, replaced by focus. I started fixing up my tools again, organizing the garage, tuning the old radios. The rhythm of purpose returned. It felt like preparing for a job I hadn't done in years, a job I suddenly realized I'd never stopped being good at. Because when you spend your whole life fixing what's broken, you learn exactly how to take things apart. But the final straw came one sunny Saturday afternoon. I'd gone to the supermarket, and in the parking lot, I saw them, my daughter and her husband, laughing beside their new BMW. The same arrogance in his posture, the same dismissive smile when our eyes met. He raised his coffee cup toward me like it was a toast. "Still driving that rust bucket?" He shouted. I smiled back. "Still driving what's mine?" I replied. He didn't get it then, but he would, soon. Because while he thought I'd faded away, I was documenting everything, every unpaid invoice, every registration under my name, every repair claim tied to my business number, every time he used my truck for profit without permission. He thought I was quiet because I was defeated. He never understood. I was quiet because I was calculating. And when he finally went away for that romantic weekend, showing off that BMW to impress investors, I knew exactly when and how to strike. That brings us back to the beginning, The evening the hook clamped onto that BMW, the crowd, the silence, the realization on his face that the man he'd mocked, dismissed, and used still held. The one thing he didn't, control. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, one legally signed, perfectly executed move at a time. And as I drove off that night, the reflection of the BMW in my rearview mirror wasn't just a car. It was the weight of every time I'd been underestimated, finally being pulled behind me. But this was only the beginning, because what he didn't know was that I wasn't done, not yet. People think betrayal feels like fire. It doesn't. It feels like silence. The kind that creeps into the corners of your house when everyone you built your life around suddenly stops calling. The kind that hums in the background of old answering machines and cold coffee cups. I used to fill that silence with the sound of tools, the ratchet of a wrench, the rhythm of a socket turning. But now, even those sounds felt like ghosts, echoes of a life that no longer existed. When I closed the shop for the last time, I told myself it was peace, retirement, the golden years. What no one tells you is that retirement is just another word for watching the world forget your name, and I might have accepted that if it wasn't for the way they made me feel small in the very world I built with my hands. The mornings used to have a kind of ritual. I'd wake up at 6, pour a black coffee into my chipped Rusty's garage mug, and sit on the porch while the sun climbed over the old oak tree in the yard. The smell of gasoline never left my clothes, no matter how much detergent I used. It clung to me, mixed with the faint scent of metal and oil, my life's perfume. After the betrayal, that smell started to feel like failure. I'd catch it in the folds of my jacket and think about how he probably wore cologne that cost more than my whole wardrobe. I remember the day I saw their business on the front page of the local paper. Young couple reinvents auto industry with modern vision. There was my daughter's smile, bright and proud, and there he was beside her, his arm around her shoulders, grinning like a man who'd just discovered gold. No mention of the man who taught him how to run a torque wrench. No mention of the man whose credit built the first shop. No mention of me at all. I tore that paper into pieces so small I could have mistaken them for ashes. But it wasn't just the business. It was the slow unraveling of everything that had made me proud. See, my daughter and I had been close once. When her mother passed, she was 16, fragile but fierce. I was the one who taught her how to drive, how to check oil, how to read the road like a story. Every dent and scratch had meaning. When she left for college, she promised she'd come back often. She did at first, but then the city got into her veins, and her visits became shorter. When she met him, I thought maybe she'd found someone who saw her light the way I did. But what I didn't realize was that people like him, men built on charm and speed, don't admire light. They drain it. Started noticing changes. She dressed sharper, talked faster, used words like equity and capital. The grease under her nails was gone, replaced by manicures and business cards. When she'd visit, she'd wrinkle her nose at my garage and say things like, "Dad, you really should modernize. You could do so much more online." I'd just smile and nod, because when your child starts to outgrow your world, you don't fight it. You just hope they remember where they came from. But one day, she stopped calling me Dad. She started calling me Pop. It might not sound like much, but there's a distance in that word, Pop, quick, casual, like a text instead of a letter. It's what people say when they're trying to remind themselves they still care, but not enough to come closer. She used to hug me tight when she'd leave. Now she just waved from the driveway, and every time that BMW pulled away, I'd stand there in the dust cloud thinking, I helped buy that car. I tried to keep my dignity. I told myself she was busy, that life moves fast. But then came the day I went to their house to drop off some old paperwork, and she didn't even open the door. Her husband did. He leaned against the frame like he owned the world. "What's up, old man?" he said, half smiling. Old man, it wasn't what he said. It was how he said it, like a crown he was trying to take off my head and put on his. I told him I was just dropping off some invoices I'd found with my name still attached. He barely looked at them. "Oh, don't worry about that," he said. "We'll handle it." We. That word hit me harder than I expected. I stood there, papers in hand, watching through the doorway as my daughter walked past behind him, laughing into her phone. She didn't even look up. That's when I knew I'd lost her not to another man, but to another world. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ticking clock in my living room felt like it was mocking me. Every click was a reminder that time doesn't care who it leaves behind. I sat at my table, staring at a photo me, her, and her mother at the shop back in the day. Grease on our cheeks, laughter frozen in film grain. I ran my thumb over her face, wondering where that little girl went, the one who used to call the tow truck Dad's beast. Now she rode around in a German car while I drove a relic. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the rewriting of history, like I'd never existed. Sometimes I'd still go to the old garage at night. I'd sit on a crate and listen to the wind through the cracked glass windows. The place had its own kind of heartbeat, creaks, drips, the distant hum of the highway. It felt like being inside an old song that nobody plays anymore. One night, I found the imprint of my daughter's hand on the wall from when she was little, after I'd let her paint the place yellow. Her small palm was right next to mine, both of them faded but still visible. That's when the tears finally came. Not loud or messy, just quiet. The kind that burns more than it flows. I wasn't crying for what they did to me. I was crying because I'd finally accepted they weren't coming back. In town, people whispered. They always do. Rusty's gone soft. He let the kids take over. Guess he's just a relic now. I learned to tune them out. But the worst part was pretending I was okay when everyone else thought I should be angry. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was empty. You can't be angry until you have something left to protect. And for a while, I didn't think I did. Then came the guilt. It comes in waves. You know, not all at once. You start asking yourself if maybe you were too strict when they were younger. If maybe you pushed too hard or didn't say "I'm proud of you" enough times. You start wondering if betrayal is really just a kind of delayed payback. I thought about the day she brought home her first car, a junky Honda she'd bought with her summer job money. We spent 2 weekends fixing it together. She called it Hope. When she traded it in for her first luxury lease, I didn't say a word. But deep down, it felt like watching her trade her soul for a shinier one. I didn't tell anyone about the financial mess for months. Pride is a strange thing. It's heavier than grief. I told myself I could fix it quietly, just like I fixed engines. But the numbers didn't lie. The shop lease, the taxes, the credit line, all tied to my name, all sinking with every decision he made. I could have sued, sure. But lawsuits are for men who still believe justice is quick. I'd spent enough time in the real world to know justice isn't about paperwork. It's about patience. Still, there were nights when I'd wake up with my chest tight, my jaw locked, hearing his voice in my dreams. "This is how business works now." And I'd whisper back into the dark, "No, son. This is how karma works." Then there was the loneliness. It seeps into your bones when the world moves on without you. Old friends stopped dropping by. I stopped answering calls I didn't recognize. Even the mail felt colder bills, notices, nothing human. The only constant was that old truck sitting in the driveway covered in dust. I used to think about selling it, but something in me wouldn't let go. Maybe because deep down, I knew that truck still had one more job to do. Months passed, seasons changed, and slowly, the hurt began to turn into something sharper. Every humiliation, every dismissal, every smile they flashed while spending what I built, it all piled up like kindling waiting for a match. One evening, I stood in my driveway watching the sunset bleed orange across the horizon. The light hit the chrome on the truck just right, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Because I realized something. They hadn't taken everything. They'd taken my shop, my name, my reputation, but they hadn't taken my skill. They couldn't. And that's when the gears inside me started turning again. People say revenge is ugly. Maybe it is, but sometimes it's just another word for balance, and I was done waiting for balance to find me. That night I went inside, poured myself a drink, and took out every old document I'd kept. The business filings, the truck title, the service licenses. Each page was a reminder that the past wasn't dead, it was just sleeping, waiting for someone to wake it up. As I stacked the papers neatly, I could almost hear the sound of an engine turning. Over after years of silence, the plan wasn't clear yet, but the decision was, I was done. Being the quiet old man people laughed at. It was time to remind them what real craftsmanship looks like, not in metal, but in justice. The breaking point doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with thunder or fireworks. It comes quietly like a drip that finally overflows the bucket you've been ignoring. For me, it was a Tuesday. A hot, dry Tuesday when the air felt thick enough to chew. I had stopped by the hardware store to pick up some bolts, and as I walked through the parking lot, I heard that familiar hum, the sound of the BMW's engine. And there they were, my daughter and her husband, stepping out like they owned the world. She was laughing about something, wearing sunglasses big enough to hide behind. He was on the phone talking loud about clients, expansions, and investments. They didn't see me at first. I stood there behind a row of trucks, watching them load groceries into the BMW, watching her slip into the passenger seat like a stranger in a movie I used to be in. When she finally noticed me, her expression flickered, guilt, surprise, maybe even a little shame. She waved, hesitant. I raised a hand in return, nothing more. He didn't even look up. That was the exact moment the silence broke. Not in sound, but in spirit. I went home that evening and sat in the garage until the sun disappeared. The air was heavy with the scent of oil and rust. I turned on the old radio and it sputtered through static until a country song came on. The lyrics were about a man losing everything and finding himself again. I laughed, a rough, bitter sound that echoed through the empty space. I looked around at the tools hanging on the wall, each one a story. The dented hammer from my first repair, the socket wrench that fixed a stranger's car during a snowstorm, the grease-stained rag my wife used to tease me about keeping too long. Every object in that room had meaning. Every sound, every smell. It reminded me that I had lived a real life, not a glossy one with photo ops and fake smiles. A life of grit, not polish. And in that realization came the first spark of something fierce. They thought I was obsolete. They thought time had buried me. They forgot that I built my world with my own hands and that I could unbuild theirs just as easily. That night I barely slept. My mind was a workshop of thoughts, loud, sharp, sparking off each other. Around 2 a.m, I walked outside. The town was asleep. The streetlights hummed faintly, casting long shadows across my yard. My old Chevy sat in the driveway, quiet but alive. The moonlight caught on the hood, revealing scratches and scars from decades of work. Every dent was a memory, every bolt a lesson. I opened the door, sat behind the wheel, and ran my hand along the cracked steering wheel. The leather was worn smooth where my palms had rested for years. I could almost hear the ghost of my wife's laughter from the passenger seat. She used to ride with me on late-night calls, keeping me company while I hauled broken cars through the rain. She used to say, "You don't just fix things, you save people from being stranded." And that's when it hit me, maybe it was time to save myself. The next morning, I woke up with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. I made coffee, took a long shower, and then opened a folder I hadn't touched since the betrayal. Inside were the original business registration documents, tax filings, and way most importantly, the vehicle title. My name was still there, on everything that mattered. I sat there at the kitchen table, papers spread out like puzzle pieces, and realized that all the tools I needed weren't in the garage, they were right here in black ink. He thought I was some relic who didn't understand paperwork or technology. What he didn't know was that I'd spent decades navigating contracts, insurance, and the fine print of other people's mistakes. Mechanics don't just work on engines, they learn to read systems. And life is nothing but a big, noisy system. I spent the next week visiting offices. Slowly, quietly, updating registrations, clarifying ownership, transferring rights that were legally mine but had been ignored. It was tedious work lines. Signatures, waiting rooms, but every signature was a small victory. Each one tightened the noose a little more. Meanwhile, I started paying attention to his patterns. Old habits never die, and he was still the same man he'd always been, showy, impatient, predictable. Every Friday, he'd post pictures on social media. Dinners at high-end restaurants, drinks on rooftop bars. He wanted to look successful, that was his addiction. And that's when I noticed something interesting. The BMW wasn't registered under his name, it was under the company's, the same company that was still linked to my tax ID. That was when the plan began to take shape, not out of anger, but out of precision. But before I acted, something unexpected happened. My daughter called. It had been almost 3 months since we'd spoken properly. Her voice was careful, like someone walking across a frozen lake. "Dad," she said, "I know things have been complicated, but we'd like you to come over this weekend. Maybe dinner? We can talk." For a second, I almost believed it. The tone in her voice, soft, uncertain, reminded me of her younger days. I wanted to believe she missed me. But the truth came out during dinner. She didn't invite me to make peace. She invited me to sign over what little remained in my name, the last traces of ownership, the final control I still had. "Dad, it's just paperwork," she said. "It's better for tax reasons." He sat there beside her, smiling politely, spinning a wine glass in his hand like a king entertaining a peasant. "You'll still be part of the story," he said. "Just in spirit." In spirit. I remember setting my fork down and looking him straight in the eye. "Son," I said quietly, "you can't trademark spirit." That dinner ended early. Driving home that night, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt something colder, a stillness that comes when the last piece of the puzzle slides into place. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. The sound reminded me of the first day I learned to rebuild a transmission, the patience it took, the satisfaction of each part clicking where it belonged. That was what this was, a rebuild, not of metal, of justice. Over the next few weeks, I went back to my old routines, but everything had changed. My movements had purpose. Every conversation, every visit, was part of something larger. I reconnected with a few old friends-men who ran towing companies, junkyards, repair shops. The kind of men who understood loyalty because they'd built their lives on it. We met for coffee, swapped stories, laughed about the old days, and quietly, without ever mentioning names, I asked questions. About registrations, about repossessions, about the legal side of business assets. Turns out if a company vehicle is still under the ownership of a former partner and payments default, certain actions can be taken. Actions that are perfectly legal. Then came the weekend I'd been waiting for. They were heading out of town, a romantic getaway, according to her social post. Pictures of luggage, the BMW parked in front of their house, captions about finally unplugging. They had no idea I'd already called in a few favors. Early that morning, I met an old friend named Dale at his towing lot. He still ran the same business he'd inherited from his dad, a real salt-of-the-earth kind of man. We shared coffee from thermoses and talked about old engines until the paperwork was ready. I handed him the signed authorization forms legally reclaiming my vehicle and all associated assets under my name. He looked at me, eyebrows raised. "You sure you want to go through with this?" I smiled. "I'm more than sure. I'm ready." That night I sat in my old Chevy, the engine humming softly like it had been waiting for this moment too. I could feel the history in it, the years of hard work, the long nights on the road, the storms weathered. It wasn't just a machine, it was my witness. I drove slowly through town, the lights flickering past like memories. Every corner, every sign felt familiar, but tonight it all looked different, sharper, cleaner, like life was finally aligning itself again. When I reached their street, I parked at the corner and turned off the engine. The BMW sat there, gleaming under the streetlight, like a trophy on display. I rolled down the window, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Let's finish this." Before I stepped out, I looked at the photograph, clipped to my visor the one of my daughter as a little girl sitting on the tow truck hood, laughing with her mother. I touched the edge of the photo and said quietly, "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it to wake you up." Because sometimes the only way to teach someone the cost of arrogance is to let them feel the silence that follows it. And tonight, that silence would speak louder than any words ever could. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it hums like an idling engine patient, steady, waiting for the right gear to shift. In the weeks that followed that night, I lived two lives. By day, I was the quiet retiree neighbors waved at while mowing their lawns. By night, I was a man rebuilding an invisible engine, piece by piece, one fueled not by rage, but by reason. I'd learned long ago that the difference between revenge and justice is precision. Revenge is emotional, justice is surgical. And I was about to perform the cleanest operation of my life. The first step was documentation. I gathered everything that had ever tied me to that company: receipts, contracts, tax filings, emails. The house was covered in paper stacks for days. I spent hours under the soft glow of the desk lamp, my glasses sliding down my nose, highlighting details that most people would miss. That's the thing about working with machines, they teach you patience. You can't rush a rebuild. You have to know where every screw belongs, every seal fits, every wire leads. Miss one step, and the whole system fails. This wasn't so different. Except this time, the machine I was rebuilding was my dignity. I made a list on a yellow notepad. At the top, I wrote, Step 1, Ownership. Confirm the truck and business filings were still legally under my name. Step 2, Leverage. Gather proof of. Misuse the BMW purchase, the insurance, the company funds used for personal expenses. Step 3, Activation. Transfer all rights of repossession to my control. Each line was neat, underlined, methodical. As I checked off each box, I felt my pulse steady. It wasn't excitement, it was focus. The same quiet rush I used to get when diagnosing an impossible engine failure and finding the one loose wire that caused it all. A few days later, I called Dale again, the tow yard owner who'd helped me before. We met at the same diner we'd both been eating at since the 90s. The waitress still recognized us, poured our coffee without asking, and gave me that curious look that small-town folks give when something's brewing. Paperwork looks good, Dale said, flipping through the folder I handed him. You've got every legal right. He signed this lease under your business name, not his personal one. Technically, you could repossess anything the company bought. I nodded. That's the plan. He looked up, studying me for a moment. You really think he won't fight back? Oh, he will, I said, smiling faintly. But he'll lose twice, once in front of everyone, and once when the paperwork hits. That was the beauty of patience. He was fast. I was steady, and in the long game, steady always wins. I didn't move immediately. Timing mattered. I waited for the perfect opportunity the day I knew he'd be away from town. The day that BMW would be parked outside their house, gleaming and unattended. In the meantime, I started reconditioning my old truck. It had been sitting too long, and if I was going to make a statement, it had to run perfectly. I spent 3 full days in the garage cleaning, oiling, tuning. The air filled with the familiar scent of diesel and determination. I replaced the brake lines, tested the hydraulics, even repainted the side panel with its original lettering. I stared at it for a long while after finishing. The letters weren't as crisp as they used to be, but they stood for something real, a life built on work, not words. And I decided that when I drove that truck again, it wouldn't be just another tow. It would be a message. The night before the plan, I slept better than I had in years. I woke up early, made a strong pot of coffee, and put on my old work jacket, the one with my name embroidered on the chest. The sleeves were frayed, the zipper stiff, but it felt right. It felt like armor. By noon, everything was in motion. The ownership transfers had cleared. The local authorities had confirmed the repossession order. It was official the BMW, registered under the business that still carried my ID, was subject to recovery. All legal, all clean. I didn't want chaos. I wanted clarity. Around 6 that evening, I drove into town. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of cut grass and barbecue smoke. Families were setting out lawn chairs, kids playing catch, music drifting from open windows. A normal summer evening. No one noticed the old Chevy roll by. No one ever does until it stops in front of them. When I turned down their street, my heart didn't race. It slowed. The kind of calm that only comes when the storm is already over. The BMW sat in the driveway like a silver statue. Perfect. untouched. I parked across the street, stepped out, and walked around the truck to double-check the chains. The sound of the hooks clinking together brought back memories, every tow, every rescue, every late-night call. My hands moved on their own, muscle memory from a lifetime of service. I backed up the Chevy, aligned the rig, and lowered the boom. The steel arm extended with a slow, deliberate hiss. The hook slid under the BMW's front axle with a satisfying click. I could have done it blindfolded. Just as I began raising the car, I heard a voice behind me. "Rusty? That you?" It was one of the neighbors, old Mrs. Hargrove, standing on her porch with her little dog. "Evening." "Ma'am," I said politely. She squinted. "Is that your car?" "Not yet," I replied. "But it soon will be." Her brow furrowed in confusion, but she didn't press further. Folks around here knew when to mind their business. The lift engaged, the hydraulics groaned, and slowly, the BMW's tires lifted off the ground. I secured the chains, locked the wheel clamps, and stepped back to inspect the scene. It was a beautiful sight, my old, battle-worn truck hauling the very symbol of arrogance that had mocked it for years. As I climbed into the driver's seat, the streetlights flickered on. The reflection of the BMW shimmered in my rearview mirror, sleek, expensive, soulless. For a moment, I thought about my daughter, about the young girl who used to ride beside me, handing me wrenches, asking questions about how things worked. She'd always been curious, smart. Somewhere along the way, she'd learned that shortcuts look prettier than scars, I whispered under my breath. "I hope this brings you back to the truth." Then I shifted into drive. The chains tightened. The truck moved forward, slow and deliberate. The sound of rubber scraping asphalt filled the quiet street. I didn't take it straight to the tow yard. No, that would have been too simple. Instead, I made one stop first, right in front of the same restaurant where they'd humiliated me, once the one where he told me I was too sentimental for business. It was Friday night, and the place was packed. People eating, laughing, living. And there, in the parking lot, I parked the truck under the bright neon sign. For a few seconds, no one noticed. Then someone pointed. Then the whispers started. Then the phones came out. In a small town, reputation travels faster than light. I stepped out of the truck, adjusted my jacket, and leaned against the door. When a young man approached, camera ready, he asked, "Hey, what's going on? Is that a repo?" I smiled. "Something like that." The BMW gleamed under the lights, chained behind the old Chevy that everyone said was past its prime. The contrast was perfect old versus new, integrity versus illusion. I let it sit there long enough for word to spread, long enough for the couple to see it online before they even made it back to town. Then I climbed back in and drove away, not fast, not dramatic, just steady, confident. Back at Dale's lot, we processed the paperwork together. Everything was legal, stamped, signed. The car would be held until the matter was settled, which, considering the records I'd turned in, meant it wouldn't be theirs for long. When it was done, Dale handed me a receipt and said, "You know, I've seen a lot of folks try to get even, but I've never seen anyone do it this clean." I chuckled. "I'm a mechanic, Dale. I don't like messy work." He nodded. "What are you going to do now?" "Go home," I said simply, "and let silence do the rest." As I drove back through the quiet streets, the night air felt lighter. I rolled the window down, letting the wind whip through the cabin. The truck hummed beneath me like a living thing, proud to have one more purpose before its time was up. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just hums along the road at 20 miles an hour, towing the truth behind it. And for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of betrayal anymore. It was following me instead, legally attached, fully exposed, and going exactly where it belonged. It didn't take long for the news to spread. In a small town like ours, nothing ever stays quiet, especially when pride is on display. By Saturday morning, the picture of my old tow truck hauling their BMW had already made its way across every local Facebook group and coffee shop conversation. I didn't post it myself, but I didn't have to. The town did it for me. People love a good story, especially one that smells of poetic justice. When I woke up that morning, the air felt different, lighter. I brewed my coffee and stood by the window, watching the street like it was a stage waiting for the next act to begin, and right on cue. Around 9 a.m., I saw their car, or rather, the empty driveway where it used to be. I could almost feel the storm coming. They arrived around noon, the sound of tires screeching echoing down the block. I didn't move. I just sat on my porch, coffee in hand, as they marched up the driveway. He was first sunglasses on, jaw tight, that same arrogant stride. She followed a few steps behind, her expression pale, eyes darting between us. He didn't even bother with greetings. "What the hell did you do?" He barked, his voice cutting through the quiet. I took a slow sip. "Morning to you too. Don't play dumb with me," he snapped. "You had my car towed. Do you have any idea what you've done? That's theft." "You're finished, old man." I looked at him, calm as a pond. "Theft? No, that word doesn't apply here." He stepped closer, jabbing a finger in my direction. "You're going to regret this. I've got contacts lawyers," I interrupted softly. "And I've got ownership papers. You might want to call your lawyer before you make threats that don't hold." For the first time, he hesitated. Just a flicker, but I saw it. The kind of flicker that appears when arrogance meets reality. My daughter finally spoke. "Dad, please, tell me this isn't true." Her voice trembled, caught between disbelief and shame. I looked at her, and for a moment, all the anger I'd been holding melted into something heavier sorrow. "It's true," I said quietly. "Every word, every signature. The business was built on my name. The truck, the lease, even that car you love so much, all under the company I started. And your husband here never bothered to change the filings. He just assumed I'd be too old, too quiet, or too stupid to notice." She shook her head slowly. "But why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," I said. "You stopped listening." That silence between us was worse than any shouting match could have been. I finally broke it, his tone dripping with disdain. "You think this little stunt proves something? You're still a nobody, a washed-up mechanic living off nostalgia." I stood then, slow and steady, walking down the steps until I was close enough to see the sweat forming at his temple. "You're right," I said. "I am a mechanic, which means I understand something you never will. Everything that runs smooth depends on what happens under the surface. You can paint over rust all you want, but it still eats the metal from the inside." His smirk faltered. I could see the neighbors now, curtains moving, doors opening. The show had an audience. He noticed too, glancing around as whispers spread. The perfect little empire he'd built on image was starting to crumble, and he knew it. He tried to recover, raising his voice. "You think anyone cares about your old paperwork?" "We'll fight this." "Good," I said, smiling faintly. "Then you'll be fighting the Department of Motor Vehicles, the state registry, and the local licensing board, because they already have copies." I sent everything before sunrise, his face drained of color. "What did you just say?" I said, I repeated evenly, "You built your success on my foundation. And the problem with that is when the foundation reclaims itself, the house falls." The air went still. Even the wind seemed to pause. My daughter turned away, covering her face with her hands. I could hear her voice breaking. "Why didn't you just talk to me, Dad? Why like this? I wanted to reach out, but I didn't. Some lessons can't be spoken. They have to be lived." I tried to, I said softly. "But every time I looked at you, I didn't see my daughter anymore. I saw someone else's reflection. Maybe this is the only way to bring her back." He rolled his eyes. "You're delusional. You think anyone's going to side with you after this? You'll look like some bitter old man trying to ruin our lives." "Maybe," I said. "But funny thing about truth, it doesn't care how it looks. It just waits for time to catch up." I stepped aside and pointed toward the driveway. "If you'd like to see your car again, you'll find it down at Dale's Tow and Storage. But you'll need to bring proof of ownership, real proof." That was the final nail. He stormed off, muttering curses under his breath, pulling out his phone like it was a weapon. She followed behind, silent, defeated. The engine of their borrowed rental roared to life, and they sped away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and whispers. That evening, I took a walk through town. The sunset painted everything gold, the kind of light that makes even broken things look holy for a moment. People nodded as I passed, some with quiet smiles, others with knowing looks. A few even clapped me on the back and said, "About time, Rusty." It wasn't celebration I felt. It was relief, like finally letting go of something heavy you didn't realize you'd been carrying. By the next week, the damage to their image was done. News spread fast. Clients started pulling contracts. Investors backed out. Someone even leaked the fact that the BMW, the company's flagship vehicle, was repossessed over fraudulent registration. The empire of pride began to crumble from within. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I didn't speak. I let silence do the talking, and silence, when it belongs to the righteous, echoes louder than any speech. Every morning I'd walk past the shop they once ran. The sign had been taken down. The windows were dark. A single sheet of paper was taped to the door, a legal notice. I stood there for a long time, the smell of old oil still lingering in the air, and whispered, "I told you, son. Business is business." A few days later, I got a call, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. It was her. Her voice was small, fragile like it used to be when she was a child. "Dad, can we talk?" We met at the same diner where it all began. She sat across from me, no makeup, no pretense, her eyes red from tears. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I really didn't know he was using your name. I thought you'd given it all willingly." "I did," I said, "until it stopped being shared and started being stolen." She nodded slowly, stirring her coffee even though she wasn't drinking it. "He's gone. Packed up, left town this morning. Said he needed space to rebuild." "Good," I said. "He'll have plenty of space where he's going." She looked up, half smiling through her tears. "You really towed his car?" "Legally," I said. "With documentation." For the first time in years, she laughed, not the hollow laugh I'd heard before, but the real one, the one that used to echo through the garage when she was little. "I guess I should have known," she said. "You always said every machine breaks down eventually." "Only the ones that aren't built right," I replied. We sat in silence for a while after that. But it wasn't the heavy kind anymore. It was peaceful, like two people finally remembering who they were before the world got too loud. Before she left, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Dad, for forgetting who taught me what real work looks like." I squeezed her hand gently. "We all forget sometimes. The important thing is remembering before it's too late." She nodded, tears glistening. "You think he'll ever come back?" "If he does," I said, smiling faintly, "he'll have to pay the tow fee first." She laughed again, a soft, trembling sound that healed something in me I didn't even know was still broken. When I drove home that evening, the streets looked different. Not because they'd changed, but because I had. For the first time in a long while, I felt light, unburdened, whole. The old Chevy sat in the driveway, paint chipped, lights dim, but proud. I rested my hand on the hood, whispering, "Good job, old friend." It didn't answer, but it didn't have to. Machines like that don't need words. They just keep running, until justice is done. I walked up the steps, the porch creaking under my boots, and turned back one last time to watch the sun setting behind the hills. The air smelled like rain, like something clean after a long storm. I know people will talk for years about what happened, the man who used his tow truck to reclaim his name, the mechanic who turned humiliation into justice. But for me, it wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration, because sometimes life takes everything from you just to remind you that you never needed much to begin with. Just a little integrity, a steady hand, and the courage to stand alone when no one else remembers what you built. It's funny how quiet justice sounds once it's over. No applause. No headlines, just the steady rhythm of life going on, softer somehow, lighter. The town moved on, as towns do. People still nod at me on Main Street, some with a grin that says they know the story, others with the kind of respect you can't buy. Dale still jokes that I made towing history, and the waitress at the diner never lets me pay for my coffee anymore. But none of that is what matters most. What matters is that the silence inside my house finally changed. It's no longer heavy. It breathes again. There's laughter, sometimes my daughter's voice, visiting on weekends, helping me fix things around the yard. She still drives her old car now, the one we rebuilt together years ago. Said it felt real to be behind a wheel that wasn't leased with lies. We don't talk much about him anymore. She's healing. So am I. The old Chevy sits in the driveway, paint dulled by time but proud as ever. Some nights I'll sit behind the wheel and let the engine idle, just to hear that familiar hum. It's not about the machine. It's about memory, about knowing that what once carried the weight of others' mistakes now carries peace instead. There's a lesson in that sound. It says, never trade authenticity for approval. Never hand your name to someone who doesn't know its worth. And never believe that silence means weakness, because silence can also mean readiness. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened. If I'd done nothing, if I'd stayed quiet, accepted the disrespect, kept pretending everything was fine. Maybe the world would have called that humility, but I know the truth now. There's nothing humble about letting someone trample your legacy. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of self-respect, and when I look back, I don't see vengeance. I see balance. The scales finally evened out. Before bed, I still say goodnight to my wife's photograph on the mantel. I imagine she's proud not because I won, but because I remembered who I was. Because I kept the fire without letting it turn to ash. I've learned that every man reaches a point where he has to decide whether he'll let life write his ending, or take back the pen. I chose the latter. And so, to whoever's listening, maybe you've been betrayed, mocked, overlooked. Maybe you've handed too much of yourself to people who didn't deserve it. Take it from an old mechanic. Everything broken can be fixed if you're willing to get your hands dirty again. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just rumbles quietly down the road in an old truck, towing away everything that once held you back. So tell me, what would you have done in my place? Comment below, like this video, and subscribe for more stories that remind you sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one holding all the power.